Boom, boom, ba boom, 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 ba boom, 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 ba boom. Hey, do you remember when we had intro music? Alrighty, well, welcome back once again. That might be a little on the bright side. Still not quite sure how this whole lighting thing's supposed to work. My name is Roy. Welcome to Escaping Dystopia, my little basement show. Today is June 20th, 2018. Tonight's show is entitled The Big Lie Immigration Debate. We're going to be talking quite a bit about the immigration stuff tonight, and then a few other topics. This has been a particularly difficult week, in a lot of ways. It's been a really big news week. As a big story continued to break and break and break as the American people found out more and more about what's been going on down on the border. The outrage has been consistent and loud across a lot of our society. This has been an important week because we went through having the president just flat out lying about what's going on, why it's going on, who is to blame for what's going on, denying it. I believe there was a story in the Washington Post that said there had been 14 different stances that the White House had taken on this story, going from because they started out, it's going to be a deterrent, we're going to do this policy just so we can stop people. Then they start saying, well, we didn't ever say that. And then they're saying it's not a policy. Then they are saying it's a policy. Then they're saying it's somebody else's fault. And they said, well, we can't do this and we can't have an executive order. And then today, the president signed an executive order that he is claiming allegedly ends the practice of child separation. I read through the executive order. We're going to see some more news on that, and I'll probably cover it again next week. From what I read in that executive order, that was not an executive order aimed at ending child separation. That was an executive order that was a political document that blamed Congress and Democrats for not fixing it and claimed that it sets up indefinite detention of asylum seekers and other people waiting for trial. I'll get to that in a little bit. Some of the stuff that we learned this week, and this is just for history to note, we found out that the zero tolerance policy from the Trump administration was leading directly to them taking away children. I don't know what the youngest is. There's apparently 3 buildings or camps with toddlers or tender age children, as they name babies and toddlers. The way that immigration law works in this country, each individual is expected to represent themselves or obtain representation in court. And I've talked about this before. The idea previously, right, had always been that children would be with their parents. So now they're not and are expected to defend themselves or go through the process of applying for asylum. We're going to talk about this asylum stuff a little bit more, and one of the good things about this is that more people are learning about how this process works in this country. The notion that everybody who's caught or everybody who crosses over is immediately a criminal is just not true. That's the whole point of the zero tolerance. That's what the no tolerance is. That's what you're not tolerating, right? Is the notion that anybody can come over here and not be a criminal that has to be immediately prosecuted and also remanded to detention until their trial date. So that's what we're going for now. Now the idea is that we're not going to separate families. However, our immigration courts are very backed up. This is not news to anyone. They are not fast. They're not quick. I posted something today that was an article from 2015 that talked about how people who had their upcoming their asylum court cases and the earliest that they were sending out notices for was in 2019. Right? This is over a year from now. This was 3 years ago that this article came out talking about this. We're talking about delays in the nature of years. And this is why the Obama administration had adopted what has been called that catch and release policy, where you get somebody, you give them a court date, and you don't hold them in detention the whole time. This isn't an easy problem to solve, and that's why it's so difficult to see somebody coming here and slamming around this kind of stuff. Some of the stuff that I wanted to talk about a little bit. So we did get the executive order today, so they're going to claim that this policy is done and over and we're not doing it anymore. We'll see how true that turns out to be. We should note that the outrage that we saw from this last week, and that was across the spectrum from a lot of different places, it works. And the resistance, when it can be loud and concentrated enough, even in the face of constant lies, it can moderate behavior. Now, again, the degree to which that behavior has ultimately been moderated is up for debate, because we'll have to see what this executive order leads to. But the fact that he was claiming last week that it's impossible for him to do an executive order, and then today he signed one to stop this, says that there is some room for change, at least in that sense. Now, what that did, and this is a little bit more about kind of what we're going to talk about, is really screw up the debate in Congress. We had reached a point where Ted Cruz, who originally had totally backed this policy of separating families in order to punitively punish people, later is now switched back to actually trying to write a bill that would stop family separation. He totally did a complete about-face. His opponent coming up in the election has been actually leading marches toward these camps. Beto O'Rourke in Texas. We'll probably send him some cash before this is all said and done, just to be clear about my position. I don't try and claim to be completely unbiased here. I think this is as something that we've seen, the line that was crossed this last week. This is not a time for unbiased. Well, I don't say that. I think you still have to be completely as accurate as possible. But when it comes to political, I'm not going to pretend like I don't think there's a much better person to represent the state of Texas than Ted Cruz, who was born in Canada and is an anti-immigration guy now. And I'll speak to that real quick, because the bills that Congress is going to debate essentially tomorrow, and this is the House, actually. There's two bills. One is the hardcore conservative bill that nobody really likes and has no real chance of passing. That's for the hardcore Republican conservatives can take back to their district and say, well, I voted to kick them all out, so, I don't know, man, those damn Democrats. So they want to do that. Then they're going to have what they called, and everybody keeps calling, the compromise bill, which is a compromise between the Republican hardliners and the Republican moderates. It's not really... They have this thing where they're like, well, and it's a question, and this bill, by the way, doesn't actually fully exist yet, right? They're supposed to vote on it tomorrow, but Paul Ryan hasn't put together the actual language. And so there's a question, because this is what's supposed to be taking care of the Dreamers as well. If you'll recall, the Dreamers are people who were brought to this country, and their parents brought them illegally, but they didn't do anything wrong. We had decided as a country that we thought these people, after this much time, 20 years, that they've only known this country, we were going to let them stay. These are the same kids in a different generation that Trump is taking away from their parents. So you just need to understand that he's taking this one generation and was trying to, and they're trying to take this one generation hostage to negotiate this other. It's really disturbing. This whole week has been really, really disturbing to see some of the stuff that people will allow in our civil society. But anyway, this compromise bill isn't even written yet, and one of the big sticking points to it will be what they're going to do with the Dreamers. If they want to, and that what I've seen is there's one like this very ridiculously difficult pathway to citizenship. Then unless you're like literally Captain America and went to the military and signed up for like special serum training, you can't get citizenship. So there's a path to citizenship, but it's a ridiculous one. The fact that it even exists in any kind of legislation means you lose the whole Tea Party, which means then the Republicans don't even actually have a majority in Congress anymore. So they can't pass, the Republicans themselves can't pass a bill that makes any kind of sense. So that was what the discharge position was about last week. It failed by 2 votes. So now Paul Ryan's coming up with this compromise, which is not a compromise. And in this compromise as well, you see one of the things that the president has demanded be in any bill is a severe reduction in legal immigration. Both what he calls the chain migration, which is just basically family-sponsored migration, and the lottery. So they're actually trying to, and they'll came again, and you always hear from some of the Republican people, oh, it's all about illegal immigration that we're against. But that's not what the bill that they're trying to get passed says. They're trying to also limit legal immigration. And speaking of legal immigrants, we also are no longer taking in, as a country, refugees. The number of refugees that we've taken in this country is one of the lowest in our history per year, and we are not the smallest country that we've ever been in our history. I think it's going to be less than 1,000 for this year, and right now, across the world, we are at a record number of refugees. One of the reasons there are so many refugees is because of this thing called climate change, which Republicans also deny. So as someone who follows the news in the world, there are a few slightly off-kilter, frustrating things about it. But my kids aren't being taken and put in cages. So I get to fight against that happening to others. We'll see what's going to happen now, because they're going to put the whole family together. And I guess if you have to be detained, which you don't have to be, right? That's a choice that the administration is having, to hold these people while they wait for their case. The thing that we've also learned is a little bit how far some of our fellow countrymen will go this week and what they will allow. And that has also been extremely disturbing, I think, for a lot of people. And I think that notion of what people will let happen and what they will approve of and what they will defend publicly, that line has been moved a great deal. And even as the president pulls back, right, all those people are already there. They've already crossed over that line, which it looks like this was a line that he crossed, right? A bad one. But that line has been crossed now, and he took a whole bunch of people with him over there. He's not going to bring them back. They're going to stay with the notion that that's okay to do to solve this problem that Congress won't solve. I was talking about this with my wife a little bit, because she doesn't really interact directly with as many people who believe this kind of stuff as I do, and I seek them out and read quite a bit of their opinions. So I have a little bit better understanding of what a lot of right-wingers think about a lot of this stuff. I don't get a lot of credit for this, because the arguments that I tend to produce, because I'm aware of this, tend to be the kind of things that destroys what they think from the inside out, and it really is frustrating for them that I know exactly what they think and then can produce arguments that destroy it. That's not fun. The right wing actually has gotten quite a bit better, and this is why people actually think Shapiro is smart, which scares me. Because that's what they've now designed a lot of their memes and concepts to do. That's why so much now of right-wing ideology is just trolling stuff. It's really quite nasty. So there's 2 bills, and I'll go back real quick. There's 2 bills they're going to debate this week. I don't think either of them is going to pass. The Republicans don't have enough votes to pass it correctly, and I don't think the Democrats, Pelosi and her iron hand, I don't think she's going to let them vote to fund the wall in order to get these kids. Especially since that wall was, again, something that Trump claimed that Mexico was going to pay for. And if the Republicans want to try and run on this idea that, well, the Democrats won't pay for the wall, so therefore they don't care about security, all you have to do is remind him that he's continually publicly said this other country would pay for it. So I don't think that's a winning argument for the Republicans going into November. So I don't think there's any real reason for Democrats to help pass legislation. This is a difficult situation to be in, because there will be people who will say, well, you just don't want to fix this so you guys can win power and then actually fix it, which I've actually given the whole answer to why that's actually a rational way to deal with this. Because the Republican solution, they aren't going to offer a real solution. Had they passed the discharge position and brought up that legislation, they could have had something that would have been close to an actual real compromise bill. But now, because you're compromising within the Republican Party, you're not actually getting a bill that becomes worthwhile to pass. And I don't think it's going to, because they can't pass it and they're not going to get help. So I'll do probably updates, and I'll probably do one next week because today's the 20th. So there was supposed to be, and there might very well still be, a large immigration march on June 30th. We'll see if this becomes a nationwide thing. Definitely, I think that's part of why the executive order was signed today, because I think the president saw this mass movement coming again and really didn't like the idea of marchers going against him across the country again a few months before an election. So I think that's part of why he gave in. The degree to which he actually gave in, we shall see. There's a number of conflicting laws now with this executive order and different orders. So how that plays out on the ground, which is where this has all come from, will be something that's going to play out over the next few weeks. So there was some other stuff that happened this week. I'm not going to go on too long tonight, but the immigration was the biggest story this week, and the immigration debate, and it's not going to be resolved, I don't think, this next week. It's going to keep going on. This is kind of the big question about what this country is going to be over the next couple generations, and that's the fight that we're in right now. I don't think we can let one election decide that whole direction of the country, particularly about what I'm going to talk about in a minute. But so, again, just a reminder, go out and vote. Don't vote for Republicans, and we should be in much better shape 6 months from now. We're also about to kick off in the next couple weeks, just in time for July 4th, some pretty big trade wars. China, we've responded. We both have put tariffs on China, and they've put some back on us. The Trump administration has threatened another $200 billion worth of tariffs on China. We only import like $150 billion worth, or excuse me, they only do $150 billion worth of our goods back, so they can't actually match that number in the tit-for-tat trade war. What Trump thinks, and by the way, his concept of how international trade works is insane. He thinks a trade deficit means that you're ripping somebody off and they're taking money from you, and that's not at all what a trade deficit means. It's, you know, how you go into a store and you give them money and they give you stuff. You don't have a trade deficit with that store. You gave them money for stuff. That's and you agreed that was an equal exchange. You don't have a trade deficit. But he's claiming that if that's all you do is you just send them their money and they give you stuff, you have a trade deficit. And that's not what it. Whew. They're not stealing money. It's a trade deficit is kind of an accounting thing. And the idea and the problem with long-term trade deficits is that you lose jobs, right? And that's the general theory. But we have full employment right now. And the problem is that he's selling this bullshit line about how the foreigners are stealing all our jobs to his base, which largely are out of the workforce. And because of our advances in medical science, they're staying alive much longer and voting much longer. And I don't know that society, we'll see if society can sustain that when the least productive members of society have the most political power. which is kind of the dynamic, now that I think about it, that we're in. And this was something that I had thought about 20 years ago when I looked at I was doing a bunch of demographic studies and saw we were going to hit this spot. We're about to, in 2020 is when we start the week crest. But yeah, I think that's what we have, is where the most political power is with the least, economically active group. And a great deal of them are outside of the workforce completely. And hence, when they have a political leader who tells lies about how how things are going, you get away with it. And so the trade war stuff, we'll see how much this is going to hurt, because overall, economically, a couple $100 billion doesn't really do that much, technically, to a $15 or $18 trillion economy, right? So you're talking about a small, 0.1, 0.2 kind of thing. So we'll see some hit on growth from this. But the danger, like I was saying, so I was going back before for the tit-for-tat fight with China, right? So we only sell to China, I think, like 160 or something billion dollars worth of goods. So China cannot put 200 more billion dollars of tariffs on us after they've already put 50, right? Because that would be, they'd have tariffs already on everything. So instead, the way that you tend to retaliate in that point is now encourage your people to not buy particular products or not help those companies do stuff, or any of 100,000 different little cuts that slow down business and raise costs and have the same anti-competitive effect as just direct tariffs. We'll see if this continues to escalate, how those kind of show up. But this was something when China and Japan got really at it. China had people burning Toyota cars, and Toyota lost a ton of market share and hasn't actually recovered even now that they've stopped that kind of stuff. And that is one of those things that does... It's really odd, because the people who actually support these kind of trade wars and all this isolationism, economic stuff, and foreign policy don't really appreciate or even just reject the notion that this international trade system is worthwhile. And I think that sentiment has actually crept pretty far into the left as well. That was with the anti-trade stuff. That's one of the things that kills me about this, because the way that trade benefits our societies, it does benefit a lot of people who tend to the ones who can do it directly, right? And that tends to be people who are more economically well off. So trade does tend to help business owners and people who are at that level of society. The problem that we've had is because our tax law is so skewed to help the wealthy, and our services don't make up for that nearly, all the benefits of the trade that we've been doing over the last 20 and 30 years have accumulated to the top. So people who are out there working see the trade as the problem. They don't see the tax policy as the problem. The tax policy that cuts taxes on capital gains to be lower than the taxes on actual labor. Right? So people who sit around and just collect money actually pay a lower tax rate than people who have to work for a living. I've talked about this before, but that's the dynamic that we've created. So all this wealth flows up to the top. So people think the system that has created all this wealth is flawed. But it's not. It works just fine to have a system where when you trade and you have something that you can trade and you both feel good about the trade, that's what you want to be doing. And you get them stuff that you don't have, and they have stuff that you don't have, and and because of that international competition, prices come down. You find good efficiencies. Again, folks, I believe in the power of the market and a good regulated free market and trade. I think these are good things, and I hate to see us totally rejecting them because our tax policy screws over everybody but the wealthy. And that's kind of what's been frustrating about seeing this kind of stuff in the trade wars. Real quick, we'll cover... Let's see how we're doing on the Tizime. All right. There's a way that the Mafia has this thing. It's called a protection racket. And the way it works is you're running your business, everything's going fine. One day, a couple of tough guys show up, walk in, start knocking some things over, maybe break a couple things and say, hey, looks like you got a problem here. A lot of stuff's all broken and things. We can keep that from happening for you. And of course people are like, what? Everything was fine before you showed up. You're the one who started to break stuff. So then those people start breaking more stuff. And they're like, I don't know what you're saying, man. There's a lot of broken stuff around here. Everything here could break pretty soon. And then the business owner says, well, wait, what's going on? And then the people who are breaking stuff say, hey, I'll tell you what, obviously this is a dangerous neighborhood. You pay us a bunch of money, and we'll protect you. We'll protect you so you won't have people breaking stuff in here all the time. And then every month, every week, we'll show up, we'll collect that money, and you won't have to worry about people breaking stuff. We'll protect you. And then, of course, the rational person was like, wait, you're protecting me from you. You're the one who's doing this. That's what Trump is doing with the immigration stuff. That's exactly what he just did. And he's done it with other things, and I think that's exactly what he's going to do with the trade wars. He's going to make them, start them, stop them, try and take credit for it, and then castigate anyone who doesn't give him credit for it as just an evil liar. He just won't ever get him credit for anything. Now, why some of this stuff I think you can keep everything that he does a little bit on that grain of salt at this point. It still seems pretty likely that the president is actually compromised by a foreign power. The way he acted at the G7 and this other stuff, his campaign president, Paul Manafort, is in prison. He's in prison for lying to the FBI about contacts and lobbying for a foreign power. You're like, well, it wasn't Russia. It was just when he was doing the... I understand that. I think Mueller continues to work a very difficult game. And I talked about this before. If you know... It's kind of one of those things, like, unless you're ready to try and take down somebody, if you're going to accuse the President of the United States of treason, you better have your ducks in the row. Because the response to that is going to be to do the same right back to you. Right? Because once you get to that level of crime and that level of danger, that's the only defense, is to go on the offense. Right? If you are accused reliably of treason, you have to discredit the accusers. And I think that's where we're headed. It does seem kind of that way. But again, the President of the United States campaign manager is in prison for lying to the FBI and then trying to tamper witnesses additionally about his trial. He's in prison. He's campaign president. You can't... Witch hunt is a bunch of crap. We just got a witch flying around, eating kids, throwing kids in cages. I hate to make jokes on that. It's not really a joke. Witches do that, though. Witches and Republicans. All right, the storm update. So I mentioned a little bit about the storm that's coming. I still think there's some serious stuff going to happen that's not what we're talking about here. One of those on the other thing, I saw that there are a number of foreign governments who are not so excited about buying U.S. bonds right now for a number of reasons. The issue with that is we're not buying them either. We stopped doing that a little while ago. We were artificially keeping down bond yields by doing so. More demand from us keeps prices down. Without us doing it, without them doing it, we're going to have to start raising interest rates even more than they already are. When that starts happening with a couple other things and some trade wars and you throw a few more things in there, boom! Bada boom! Things can get nasty. It feels like something like that's coming. Probably by the fall. I don't know. I still think end of this month. I don't know. And we'll get to the rainbow. So, I asked on my page this week if rainbows exist. And so, anybody who's watching now, you get a quick update on the follow-up question, because I think we all agree, right, that given just that question with just that phrasing, the answer is yes. Obviously, rainbows exist. So now I'm going to ask you the follow-up, and I'll probably formalize this a little bit so you can get a jump on it by watching the show. Where? Because if something exists, it has to be somewhere and somewhen. We live in a space-time continuum. So where do those rainbows exist? And I'll give you kind of an idea of where I'm headed with that. Are they in the sky or are they in your eye? And we'll talk about that a little bit this week. And other things. More on stuff next week. I'm about to get out. Have a good evening. Thanks everybody that dropped by. This has been a difficult week to follow the news and interact with folks who think putting and torturing. So one of the things that's been really difficult is from a lot of child care experts and people, we know stuff now about how the human brain develops. And when you introduce trauma like this, particularly child separation trauma, at particular ages in a kid's life, their brains don't develop the same way as people who are in that same kind of safe, loving home. Now again, these people are not coming here from great places. A lot of the people who come, especially to request asylum from Central America, are fleeing violence, nasty violence. Our Attorney General just said that no longer counts for getting asylum unless you can prove there's a law that directly targeted a group that you're a part of. So that's going to be tough too. That's one of the things that they're trying to do to reduce people from allowing to get asylum now, is both block the avenues where people can, make them sign agreements to plead guilty so they can get their kids back so they won't, and then also those kind of rulings that limit the legal areas where one can apply for asylum. Now, there is a way that goes through appeals courts and eventually gets to the normal court system, but that will be before. There will be a couple more elections before we get that far. So if you want to stop this, don't wait for some lawyer somewhere to do it. Stop voting for Republicans. All right. Thanks for watching. It's been a fun show. Appreciate it. I have to see how the light works. My face seems pretty bright. You can see my stuff. That's always fun. So everybody have a great week. Try and be good and resist, because it works. It does work. There's no question it works. And we saw that result today. Does it always get exactly what you want? No. But it's something. It's not futile. The Borg are wrong. At least so far as we know, right? So, anyway, I love it when everybody shows up right when I'm about done with the show. Anyway, thanks for dropping by, folks, and I'll see you next week. Maybe I should just ramble for like half an hour until people show up. I think I've tried that before. I think that's actually what the show is anyway. Y'all have a good night. Peace out.